Episode 3 of Night Country, True Detective Night Country, is out this evening, and I liked it a little better than the first two. I feel like maybe, I'm not quite sure, it feels like I was able to get into the various stories a little easier this week. I don't know if that's just that, by now that since it's 3 episodes in, it's easier to follow all the different things. At first it felt like this series, it just threw a bunch of stuff at you really fast and didn't take any time to really get into any of it very seriously, with very much depth. So you had the mystery of the scientists who went missing. You had this backstory mystery of this indigenous woman who was killed, murdered, very clearly murdered, stabbed to death, unsolved mystery. You had Danvers and Navarro, these are the main detectives, but you also had Danvers' little sidekick Peter Pryor and his dad Hank Pryor, who was more of a veteran cop. And you had, Navarro's lover, Eddie, and her sister, and you had Peter's wife, and all these other characters, and all these little subplots, and lots of stuff going on. And really especially the first episode, but really the first couple, just were chock full of so many things going on, so many balls in the air. It really felt like the only reason it was hard to follow wasn't because there was some really compelling, interesting mystery with lots of clues that you had to parse, but just so many subplots going on. In the second episode, we got a lot of season 1 references, like the Tuttle United Company and Travis Cole, Russ's dad. Little more subtle references like Danvers, Jodie Foster's character, saying, "You're not asking the right fucking question," which is a direct quote from season 1. Lots of that stuff. But in episode 3, it feels like a lot of those subplots have chilled out a little bit, and we're focused a little bit more on investigating both mysteries, the connected mysteries of Annie, the dead native girl, and the missing scientists who were found at the end of episode 1, dead, frozen in the ice, except for one, who was taken to the hospital, somehow survived, but in really, really rough shape. It feels like the show has finally started pacing itself a little bit better. And again, it may just be that once you sort of caught up with all of these storylines, it's a little easier to stay on top of it, a little less underwater. But it's also, I think, definitely a pacing issue, and that they've improved the pace in episode 3 and just chilled out on so much stuff going on all the time at once. Now, I really feel like they should have done this completely differently from the beginning and focused more on the case and more on the detectives from the outset and sort of introduced more of these subplots more slowly. Other things that seem sort of out of order here, Navarro finally reveals that she grew up in Boston, that her mom was from Ennis, or from this area, and she moved out there, and her dad was from out there, and she grew up there until her mom left her dad and brought her and her sister back to Ennis. At least I think I'm getting that all right. But it does explain why she looks and sounds different than the other people in this area. She grew up somewhere else. She's an outsider, and so is Danvers in a lot of ways. Danvers was transferred here. And so that helps explain stuff. And I guess I wish we'd understood that a little sooner, rather than pretty much halfway through the entire story. We also get some more backstory. I'm a little lost on the backstory here. Danvers tells Peter Pryor, about this case that they went on, this girl who was in a bad relationship, and she kept coming into the hospital, beat up, but she would never file charges against her much older boyfriend. And then one day, they went out there, and it was a murder-suicide, she says. They found them both dead. But when they show the flashback, it contradicts what she says, and you see her and Navarro show up, and the guy's still alive. The girl's dead, guy's alive, and he's really creepy, and he's whistling and grinning, and we don't really know what happens. Clearly, they covered up what happened. It seems pretty obvious they probably shot and killed him, or one of them did. But we don't learn, and so that's another mystery. And I'm not really quite sure why it was conveyed as a story to Peter, because unless I'm missing something, which is entirely possible, Danvers was explaining kind of her history with Navarro and why it's so fraught, and that doesn't really answer anything. It's a creepy scene, and I want to know more about it, but I'm not quite sure how the whole thing's being structured. Feels really, I don't know, just off to me. Like True Detective, of course, played around with chronology a lot, and you had those interviews that took place in the future, and then you had the story that was in the past, and then you caught up with the future, and then the case was, ultimately solved in the timeline of the interviews. But there's different timelines of the interviews too, so it's a little muddled, but it's always sort of pushing that mystery and making you wonder what's coming. Whereas this show feels like they're getting things out of order for reasons that I can't quite figure out. And just introducing, again, so many characters, so many subplots, and everything else. Still, I did enjoy this episode for the most part. I'm finding Foster's character more endearing. Her grumpiness is kind of funny. Both the cops, I like their characters. I don't think that they have, so far at least. I think it's just kind of the writing. Still, the dialogue feels clunky to me. Still, it feels like this show is getting nowhere fast, even though it's only 6 episodes long. Some big things happen, like they learn that Carter, am I getting his name right? Anyways, the scientist that was with the parka that went missing and Annie were certainly an item at one point. She met him when she went out with a hairstylist. They figure out that this hairstylist knew about her and him, and we learned that this hairstylist, also dated a guy out at Salal for a while, and this guy named Oliver Tagak. I don't know how to spell his last name, so I'll call it Oliver. But he's kind of, there's no real record of him. He's not on any of the files at Salal, and but Navarro talks to her boyfriend or whatever, Eddie, and he's able to figure out some information about where he is, where this guy Oliver is. He's out at this nomad settlement. So they go out there and they talk to him, and he's super, super hostile. When they find him, he's sitting there with his gun, and he tells them to leave. And when they tell him the scientists are all dead, he gets really, really rattled and much angrier and threatens them, and they leave. So we're actually getting somewhere finally with this scientist, and we'll say it's one murder. It's one investigation. They're investigating the cold case, maybe even more than they're investigating the current case, and whatever. So they go back to the hospital. And this Anders guy who's been frozen but somehow survived, but is really screwed up, is in there moaning and twitching. And Danvers goes in and tries to ask him questions. He answers her. He tells her that they woke her up and she was out there, and all this very vague stuff that could mean any number of things, but it really, ties right into the whole she's awake business that Navarro heard, and that the one guy said at the science base. So lots of vague stuff still. We really don't know what's going on. Then Danvers is brought away. I guess there's a fight that breaks out in the hospital waiting room between hillbillies and police, and the orderlies are trying to help, and Danvers runs off to help. It's a weird scene. I don't know. I don't know why Navarro doesn't go to help. She's like this really ripped lady who's clearly more capable of helping in that situation than Danvers is, but she just stands there because really all of this is an excuse to get everyone else away, so that behind her we see this Anders guy sit up in his bed with a creepy looking expression on his face. And then he talks to her and says that her mother is out there waiting for her, and they've been waiting for her, and all this creepy stuff. He really reminds me of Vecna from Stranger Things, actually. Kind of a lot, actually. And then, it's only her that sees it. So my theory is that, her sister is probably schizophrenic. Her mother apparently was also schizophrenic and ultimately walked down to the ice and to die, kind of like Travis Cole, weirdly enough. I guess that's what you do in Ennis. You just walk out into the ice to die. But my theory is that Navarro is also suffering from mental illness. There's that whole line about, don't confuse the supernatural with mental illness. And I think that's a pretty blatant clue that what's going on is not supernatural, that in fact there might be something in the water or the air or something going on in the area that is like making it worse, making it worse for her sister, who's freaking out a lot, but making it worse for her too, and she is also starting to lose her grip on reality. And that this is not actually some demon in Anders talking to her, and that there's not actually something that was awoken, some actual like malevolent spirit. It's possible I'm wrong, and there is a supernatural element, but it just feels so far off from what you'd expect in this series that I am having a hard time believing that to be the case. I think it's mental illness, but the show, even though it tells you not to confuse the supernatural with mental illness, is trying to confuse us with that very thing. So we'll see. I think that a lot of the references and Easter eggs to season 1 last week were just that. They're Easter eggs. They're meant to get Reddit threads excited about, oh, look, it's Rust's dad, and oh my goodness, how exciting, it's the spiral, and it's like that. Okay, I don't understand why that matters. Like, I don't think that's exciting in and of itself unless it has some greater meaning to the story, which I think after this episode where virtually none of that was touched on at all except for the spiral stuff, I just don't think we're actually going to get much of a connection to season 1. I think that was a head fake. And I prefer it not to be any connection at all. I would just much rather have this be a standalone story that didn't rely on season 1. Honestly, and I've said this before, I wish it wasn't True Detective at all, because if this was just Night Country and there was some crazy supernatural stuff going on, I'd be way more into it, I think. I just think that it's like a show with an identity crisis. But overall, yeah, I'm more positive about this episode than the last couple. It was easier to follow. It had some good creepy moments. The investigation is moving forward, however slowly. I don't know what the next 3 episodes will where they'll go, and I like not knowing where this is going. I have some theories. I don't know if they're also just red herrings. A good mystery will make you think you know what's coming, and then, oh nope, you were wrong, right? Like, there's a lot of great shows and books that you think they're setting it up one way, and then you're completely wrong. So caught off guard and wrong. So we'll see. I'm hopeful that that's the case. I'm hopeful that by the time I'm making my video and writing my review for the finale, that I'm like, damn, that was actually really good. I was wrong. Maybe it didn't start out great, but I was, my doubts were all washed away, and I'm happy with where this went. I mean, that wouldn't be the first time. It goes both ways. Sometimes a show starts out great and it goes way downhill. Sometimes it starts out slow and I'm not into it. By the end, I'm like, damn, that was freaking awesome. Hopefully, Night Country goes that direction and not the other direction. As it stands, I feel like this was a mixed episode, a little bit better than before, but not great. So let me know what you thought in the comments. Be sure to like and subscribe, hit the notification bell. Peace.